I've always had a bit of a passion for odd jobs. When I was a teenager, I discovered Craigslist, and everything just kind of snowballed from there. You wouldn't believe the kinds of things you can find on the internet, the kind of jobs you can secure without having to do any paperwork. Most of the time, the people hiring either don't want to be traceable by the government, or they're just far too desperate at that point to add any additional hoops to jump through. That was how I met Chelsea. It was actually a really funny story, perfect for telling at parties. It would be perfect for our wedding, too, and for telling our kids. It would have been, at least. We met because we had both been hired to come to this birthday party, a kid turning 11. Neither of us fully knew what the job entailed when we agreed, which might have been a sign that we shouldn't have, but we were both informed we'd be paid handsomely, and that was all that either of us needed to hear. When we got there, Frank, a middle-aged guy with a salt and pepper beard who smelled strongly of patchouli and marinara sauce, informed us we were to get in a huge screaming match around the middle of the party. We were playing a couple from a few houses down who were really on the fritz, I guess. We weren't told why, just what to do. I'm still not sure why he wanted us to do that. I was hesitant. I wasn't much of an actor. But Chelsea, she threw herself into the role wholeheartedly. A couple of hours later, we were sitting on the curb a block away, and she was holding a bag of frozen carrots against my swollen cheekbone, and I was nursing a blunt, wincing at how my chocolate milk-soaked clothing stuck to my skin. We compared stories of our strangest jobs, our craziest experiences, the worst things we'd ever done to make a couple bucks. We both agreed that anything below a felony was fair game, but we gravitated towards weird yet legal and harmless tasks. She had a passion for all of it that I'd never seen in anyone I'd ever met. She was really doing it for the experiences, not the money. She was a thrill seeker. I fell in love with her quickly, like getting hit over the head with a blunt object. It was aggressive and immediate. A couple of months later, we got a place together, and the rest was history. We fell into a nice, domestic routine. She made me coffee in the morning and kissed my forehead when I walked into the kitchen. We took turns cooking dinner and doing the dishes, and we watched hours of reality television slop on our sofa that was just big enough for two. We talked about the future. We talked about a dog and 2 kids and a yard. It all just fell into place. Her friends liked me, and my friends liked her, and our families were the same. My mother became a little too obsessed with having a grandchild, and I had to beg her to stop asking Chelsea about her cycle. But none of them knew about our secret life, the jobs we did together when everyone went home. It was just for us, and it was exciting, this secret hobby that we shared. The first call from OEM came on a quiet Friday. Chelsea was at her job as a barista, and I was at home getting some cleaning done before having lunch with my parents, like an old person. I was used to getting calls that didn't have identification, considering all my side jobs, so I didn't bat an eye at the NO caller ID on my screen. What was different, however, was the automated message that played as soon as I picked up the call. This call may be recorded for quality assurance and training purposes. Please state your first and last name and your date of birth. I frowned, tossing the rag I'd been cleaning the stove with onto the kitchen counter. Julian Rains, May 14th, 1999. There was a silence, and then a beep. Then a man spoke, non-automated this time. Hello, Mr. Rains. I've been informed you might be looking for a job. When Chelsea got home, I was waiting for her on the couch. She came up behind me, cupped my face in her hands, and kissed the top of my head. Hey, babe, I said, trying to keep the excitement out of my voice. How was work? Exhausting. She slumped over the back of the couch, smushing the cushions. But I got this crazy voicemail. The facility was in what looked from the outside like a dilapidated warehouse. The man who picked us up in a long black car was very quiet, answering our questions in single-word responses and keeping his eyes on the road. Chelsea and I kept giving each other small glances and squeezing each other's hands the entire way there. A man greeted us at the car door, opening it for us with a smile. He was tall and thin, and he wore a crisp suit with his dark hair slicked back, not a strand askew. Mr. and Mrs. Rains, I presume? Chelsea looked down shyly. I was surprised. She was never shy, but this situation definitely felt more professional than what we were used to. We aren't married. Oh, I'm sorry. The man tapped his forehead with the palm of his hand good-naturedly. I'm so sorry, miss. Sutherland. Miss Sutherland, of course. He reached out to shake her hand, and then mine, eager. My name is Malcolm Kessler. You can just call me Kessler. Would you like to know what you're doing here? We let Kessler lead us into the building. On the inside, it looked far less run down. We were greeted with long white hallways and bustling professionals holding coffees and clipboards, wearing matching white lab coats. Is this like a hospital? Chelsea asked, gazing around in awe. I took her hand again and she gave it a squeeze. No, not a hospital, although there are medical professionals here, and we do certainly have access to those kinds of tools. He offered us a sly grin. We entered a room with a metal table and 4 chairs, and not much else. A woman with her hair tied up in a tight bun came in, placed a stack of papers on the table, and scurried away. Kessler gestured for us to take a seat. This, he said slowly, looking from me to Chelsea and back again. This is OE. Do you know what that stands for? He waited for us to shake our heads before continuing. This is the Office of Enhanced Methods. I blinked at him, the white fluorescent lights making my eyes burn. What does that mean? I'm glad you ask. Kessler leaned back in his seat, folding his hands in his lap. Essentially, here at OEM, we test torture methods. See what works, see what doesn't, see what we need to change or scale back on. You know. I could feel Chelsea looking at me. I looked back. I couldn't quite read her expression, but somehow I still could get the gist. Is this, a government project? She asked, her eyes still locked on mine, and her brows furrowing.
Kessler chuckled.
You could say that. So, why do you need us? I asked, even though I felt I might know the answer, finally looking away from my girlfriend and back at the man in front of us. Kessler sighed, leaning forward again, resting his elbows on the table. He had quite a sharp face, but it managed to feel charming and welcoming purely from his expression. I wondered if he'd practiced that. I'll level with you, he said, quieter than before. We need volunteers, but finding volunteers for something like this is difficult. That's why now we're looking for people like you, people who are interested in doing odd jobs like this one, and we're offering a large amount of compensation. I pressed my lips together, searching his face for any sign of deception or exaggeration. I found none. I glanced back at Chelsea, who was looking at the stack of paperwork. How much compensation? I asked finally, when it became clear that no one else was going to say it. I expected Kessler to laugh. He didn't. Are you two looking to get married? I felt the room heat up. Truthfully, I had bought the ring a month ago. I was just waiting for the right time, and a time when we could properly plan for a wedding without the stress of becoming bankrupt for it. Yes, I mean, eventually. Have you seen how much those venues cost these days? Kessler raised his eyebrows sympathetically, leaning even closer to us. Not to mention a honeymoon. Are you looking to have kids, start a family? Send those kids to college? Grow old and retire? The man actually reached out, actually took my hand in one of his and Chelsea's in his other. I felt like the air in the room was being sucked out of it. I'm going to be honest with you too. I am not going to mince words.
It's tough out there right now.
I could make it so you never have to worry about money again. He left us in the room to let us talk alone, and I could have sworn I heard the lock click behind him, but to be fair, I was feeling pretty jumpy by that point. Chelsea and I sat for a moment in silence. This is a lot, she muttered, running her fingers through her hair. This place is crazy. I reached over to flip through the paperwork, chewing on my bottom lip. I saw words like non-disclosure agreement, liability, medical care. I put the paperwork back down and took her hand again. It's a lot of money. He seemed serious. Would we be considered like war criminals if we took part in this? She laughed, but I could tell she was anxious. I shrugged slowly. She rubbed at her face with her free hand, a nervous habit of hers. I reached over and tucked some hair behind her ear, smiling. She smiled back apprehensively. There was something neither of us were saying, something neither of us wanted to point out. How bad was the job to offer that amount of compensation? Still, there was a buzz between us. This was what we did. We signed up for strange things for the experiences. Chelsea lived for things like this. I think I knew the second we got there that she would end up wanting to do it. When Kessler came back, I stood up, pushing my chair back and wiping my sweaty hands on my jeans. What kind of torture are we talking about? His smile was wide. I can show you now if you'd like. He explained as he led us back down the hall, guiding us into a different room that was essentially the exact same as the one we had just been in, but with more cameras mounted on the walls and with different chairs. I winced a little when I saw the wrist and ankle restraints attached to the sterile metal frame. Everything we do here stays within these walls, he told us, gesturing for us to take a seat. Chelsea and I shared a look, then obeyed. Communication-wise, but also physically. We will do nothing to permanently damage you, and we have medical staff on site for any treatment you may need. As if on cue, a man in one of the lab coats bustled into the room, pushing a cart. He began strapping down our wrists, leaving our legs unrestrained. Everything is voluntary, Kessler continued. Nothing will happen to you without your explicit consent, although we may need to withhold some details in order to get the most accurate read on your reactions. You can leave or discontinue your contracts at any time. The man in the lab coat started putting on medical gloves. I swallowed hard. What is he going to do? Kessler nodded at the man, who procured a syringe from his cart, examining the needle carefully and then picking up a little glass bottle to draw from. This is just, let's call it a sample. This is something we've been working on for a while. It's already been tested many times with a high success rate. I wondered what a high success rate in this context was. A large sum of pain? The right amount of screaming? Usually, we'd probably hook you up to various brainwave sensors, but we'll start light today. The doctor, was he a doctor? Approached Chelsea, who squirmed anxiously. He wiped her arm with an alcohol swab and began feeling around for a good vein. I watched her, trying to look encouraging when her eyes met mine. This is a sort of liquid electrocution, per se. Before either of us could reply to that, the doctor was inserting the needle into Chelsea's arm and pushing down on the plunger. I watched her body seize up, her eyes going wide and glassy. She was perfectly still for a moment, save for her mouth falling open and her entire face going slack, and then she began to twitch and spasm, her limbs jerking with no control. Then she screamed, a gurgling, horrifying sound, and I was struck with panic. I was so distracted, I barely felt the needle sliding into my own arm. And then it felt like I was being set on fire. We didn't go back to that place for a couple of months. Kessler told us to take our time, to think about it, as he handed us a tall stack of dollar bills. The feeling of the money almost bulging out of my pocket almost made up for the pain. It's a lot of money. He seemed serious. Would we be considered, like, war criminals if we took part in this? She laughed, but I could tell she was anxious. I shrugged slowly. She rubbed at her face with her free hand, a nervous habit of hers. I reached over and tucked some hair behind her ear, smiling. She smiled back apprehensively. There was something neither of us were saying, something neither of us wanted to point out. How bad was the job to offer that amount of compensation? Still, there was a buzz between us. This was what we did. We signed up for strange things for the experiences. Chelsea lived for things like this. I think I knew the second we got there that she would end up wanting to do it. When Kessler came back, I stood up, pushing my chair back and wiping my sweaty hands on my jeans. What kind of torture are we talking about? His smile was wide. I can show you now if you'd like. He explained as he led us back down the hall, guiding us into a different room that was essentially the exact same as the one we had just been in, but with more cameras mounted on the walls and with different chairs. I winced a little when I saw the wrist and ankle restraints attached to the sterile metal frame. Everything we do here stays within these walls, he told us, gesturing for us to take a seat. Chelsea and I shared a look, then obeyed. Communication-wise, but also physically. We will do nothing to permanently damage you, and we have medical staff on site for any treatment you may need. As if on cue, a man in one of the lab coats bustled into the room, pushing a cart. He began strapping down our wrists, leaving our legs unrestrained. Everything is voluntary, Kessler continued. Nothing will happen to you without your explicit consent, although we may need to withhold some details in order to get the most accurate read on your reactions. You can leave or discontinue your contracts at any time. The man in the lab coat started putting on medical gloves.
I swallowed hard.
What is he going to do? Kessler nodded at the man, who procured a syringe from his cart, examining the needle carefully and then picking up a little glass bottle to draw from. This is just, let's call it a sample. This is something we've been working on for a while. It's already been tested many times with a high success rate. I wondered what a high success rate in this context was. A large sum of pain? The right amount of screaming? Usually, we'd probably hook you up to various brainwave sensors, but we'll start light today. The doctor, was he a doctor? Approached Chelsea, who squirmed anxiously. He wiped her arm with an alcohol swab and began feeling around for a good vein. I watched her, trying to look encouraging when her eyes met mine. This is a sort of liquid electrocution, per se. Before either of us could reply to that, the doctor was inserting the needle into Chelsea's arm and pushing down on the plunger. I watched her body seize up, her eyes going wide and glassy. She was perfectly still for a moment, save for her mouth falling open and her entire face going slack, and then she began to twitch and spasm, her limbs jerking with no control. Then she screamed, a gurgling, horrifying sound, and I was struck with panic. I was so distracted, I barely felt the needle sliding into my own arm. And then it felt like I was being set on fire. We didn't go back to that place for a couple of months. Kessler told us to take our time, to think about it, as he handed us a tall stack of dollar bills. The feeling of the money almost bulging out of my pocket almost made up for the pain. He had told the truth. It didn't last. It felt like the effects of the injection lasted an hour, but we were told it had only been a few minutes before it wore off. I expected to be weak leaving the facility and prepared myself to be embarrassed to handle it worse than my girlfriend did, but the feeling faded fast. In fact, I almost felt more alive. We were given a brief interview where a younger man scribbled extensive notes, and then we were free to go. The first thing Chelsea said to me when we got outside was, "What a rush." Still, we waited a while. It felt like a next step in our odd jobs hobby to make this a regular thing, like something a little bit depraved. It was dystopian, it was strange and scary. Even though the sensation was gone, I could vividly remember what the injection had done to me, how it had torn through my veins, how I had wondered if I was dying, and that was supposed to just be a sample. But eventually, neither of us could stay away. The money was good beyond good. At first, we kept it a secret from each other, as if we were doing something bad. She would head off to work, and I would drive to the warehouse. They would inject me, feed me things that made me sick, toss me around, even beat me, and then I would drive home, still reeling and sore. Chelsea started acting strange, staying up after I went to bed, but I couldn't exactly call her out on it, because I was being strange too. Neither of us wanted to put any pressure on the other, I guess. And I don't think either of us liked the idea of the other getting tortured. It was all but confirmed in my mind that we were both doing the same thing when I caught her coming through the front door at almost 3 a.m., rubbing at her temple like she had a horrible migraine. I was sitting on the couch, reading a book, waiting for her. She stopped cold, her eyes going wide. I couldn't help but chuckle. "Cheating on me?" I asked. She laughed, plopping down next to me on the couch. "Not exactly." I pulled her to me, and she rested her head on my shoulder. "Let's just do it together, okay? From now on, let's just go together." I waited for an answer, but after a minute, all I got was a snore. We went together the next weekend. Kessler greeted us, patting each of us on our backs cheerfully. "Great to see you two together again. The work you both have been doing here is just fantastic." Chelsea and I eyed each other, and she gave me a little punch on the arm.
"I klinte her."
"I have something different for you two today, now that you're here together, if you're up for it." My smile faded a little, twisting into mild concern. I licked my lips. "Different how?" He waved me off, guiding us into one of the rooms. The same chairs greeted us, with their cuffs and restraints. A doctor was already inside, toying with some kind of strap. It looked sort of like a headband. "We'd like to try something more psychological than you're used to." I stopped in my tracks. Kessler and Chelsea both turned to face me, their eyebrows raising in sync. Psychological torture? I was getting vivid images in my head, all of the psychological horror movies I'd ever seen rushing back to me. Physical pain was one thing, but sanity was delicate, something that shouldn't be played with. Kessler approached me, placing his hands on each of my shoulders, and offered me a reassuring smile. "Think about it, Mr. Rains," he said, his voice kind. "It will be a brief test. It'll only last around 30 seconds. Like I've said, nothing will leave this facility, and we have professionals to assess your mental state directly afterwards. 30 seconds for enough money to buy a used car." I worried my lips together, the fear I'd had in the past creeping back in. If it wasn't dangerous, why was it worth so much? Worth more than we'd been paid for anything before? "Come on, Jules." Chelsea smiled at me from behind him. She didn't look afraid, and it soothed me a little. "We'll do it together." I nodded reluctantly. Almost as soon as my chin raised to do so, the doctor was slipping the headband on, 2 metal plates digging into my forehead. I felt my muscles tense up. We took our seats, and Chelsea reached over to grab my hand. They didn't strap us down this time, which I hardly thought about until after it was too late. The doctor put Chelsea's headband on too, and she made a face at me, which made me bite back a laugh. "Ready?"
Kessler asked.
Then he nodded at the doctor, who pressed something on what looked like a keyboard, and Julie started to scream. The second he touched the thing, she was screaming. It wasn't like any scream I had ever heard before, not like the one from the first time we'd been here, and not in any horror movie. Certainly never in real life. It felt like my eardrums were bursting, and it only grew louder and more shrill. It was desperate. It was beyond torture, beyond pain, beyond anything a human could possibly endure. I imagined hell. I imagined that souls being dragged to damnation might sound something like that scream. I wasn't even religious. She squeezed my hand, and I felt my bones cracking.
Chelsea.
I rocketed out of my seat, trying to shake her, trying to ignore the searing pain. She wouldn't let go of my hand. Couldn't. Her eyes were wide open and dead, looking right at me, but not seeing anything. Still, tears streamed from them, more tears than I'd ever seen anyone cry. I whipped back around. The doctor was typing urgently at his computer, and Kessler was staring, his hands out and his eyes moving rapidly back and forth like he was in shock. "Jesus Christ, do something." I screamed. "Fucking do something." Chelsea was gasping now, a ragged sound that bounced around in my head. It felt like I could hear nothing but that horrible wet gasp, just dead air, and her throat clawing for breath, drool seeping from her mouth and down her chin. Finally, I ripped the headband off her. Instantly, she went slack, letting go of my hand. The room was silent for a moment. Then Kessler muttered something to the other man, and the doctor rushed out the door.
"Chelsea?"
"Chelsea, baby, are you okay?" I kneeled in front of her, rubbing her knee. She wouldn't look at me, wouldn't move. For a second, I wondered if she was dead. "Please answer me." Right when I was about to check her pulse, her head turned. She wasn't screaming anymore, but her eyes were just as dead as they had been before when they met mine. They didn't even look like her eyes anymore. She opened her mouth, and out of it came a horrible whispery sound, like she'd forgotten how to use her tongue. I leaned in closer, trying to smile at her weakly. "What is it, honey?" "Please," she gasped. "No more." I felt hot. I felt like I had a horrible fever. I reached up, touched her wet face. "It's over, baby. No more. It's over." She stared at me, if you could call it that. She wasn't in her body anymore. This was something else. She twitched. "Just kill me." I turned back to look at Kessler. He looked just as shocked as I did, anxiously adjusting his tie. For a long moment we met eyes, and I knew what he was thinking. Something had gone horribly, unbelievably wrong here, and he didn't know how to fix it. The next few hours were a horrible blur. I remember doctors rushing around, wheeling Chelsea out of the room despite my pleas to know where they were going, to let me go with them. I sat alone in the cold, sterile room, her scream echoing around in my head. I cried. I begged the cameras in the corners of the room. I banged my head against the table. Someone came in and bandaged up my broken hand, but no one would tell me anything. It felt like days that I was in there. Honestly, it could have been. When the door finally opened again and Kessler stepped through it, I couldn't even feel relieved. I just felt broken. Where is she? I croaked, raising my head. Is she okay? He said nothing, just sat down in front of me. He was back to business. The horrified expression I'd last seen him have completely wiped away, although I could have sworn his face was a little pale. He took an envelope out of his pocket and placed it on the metal table between us. Miss Sutherland is right outside. She's unharmed and feeling fine. I choked out a sob. I couldn't help it. I hid my face in my hands. Kessler cleared his throat and continued. You are to take this envelope. Inside is a check for $700,000. One of our drivers is going to take you to the emergency room, where you will have your hand properly treated. Any further medical bills will be completely covered by us. You are to do this, and then go home and never return here. Do you understand? I looked up at him, and I nodded. I was angry. I wanted to yell, demand answers, threaten to sue, but I was far too exhausted for any of that. I just wanted to see Chelsea. I just wanted to go home. Kessler nodded, his mouth pressed into a thin line. We at OEM are terribly ashamed about what took place today. Please accept our deepest condolences. Something about that rubbed me the wrong way, made my skin prickle, but my mind was numb. I just nodded again, taking the envelope and shoving it into my pocket. Chelsea was just outside like he'd said, and she smiled when she saw me. I gathered her in my arms and squeezed, breathing in the scent of her hair, kissing the side of her neck. Thank God you're okay. Hey, don't cry. She pulled back, kissing my cheek and wiping away my tears. I'm more than okay, baby. What a rush. A laugh burst out of me like an uncontrollable cough. You're a psychopath. You like it. As promised, we were taken to the hospital, where I was put in a cast. My hand was broken in 3 different places. As Chelsea sat with me while they examined it, a horrible, anxious feeling crept over me. When I looked at her, all she did was smile. I couldn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling, white spots drifting across my vision, my hand throbbing dully on my chest. Chelsea's back pressed against the side of my arm was the only thing that made me feel any calmer. I turned to look at the back of her head, chewing on my lip. The room felt too quiet, too dark after spending so long in that bright, sterile room. I was restless.
Chelsea.
I whispered, Are you awake? She said nothing. She wasn't snoring, but I swore I could hear her heart beating. Gatunk, gatunk, gatunk. I sighed. What did you feel? When it was happening, I knew she wouldn't respond, but I asked anyways. I needed to talk, even if it was just to myself. Gatunk, gatunk. I felt her shift a little, her back moving with each of her breaths. Her heartbeat began to speed up. Only then did I begin to wonder why I could hear it at all, and so loud. I sat up a little, leaning on my elbows. I stroked her hair. Hey baby, are you okay? No answer. Gatunk, gatunk, gatunk. Suddenly, I had that feeling. I had that feeling children get at night, when they become positive there's someone in the closet or just outside their bedroom door, someone they don't know. Panic raced through me, and whether it was rational or not, I had to see her face. I had to be sure she was alive, and she was herself, and she was real. I reached over and took her arm, rolling her towards me. Chelsea's eyes were wide open, bloodshot, and my heart jumped into my throat when I realized it hadn't been her heartbeat that I had been hearing. It had been her gasping for air, her throat closing and opening again rapidly, swallowing and heaving dryly in the dark like an animal about to throw up. Gatunk, gatunk, gatunk. I shook her awake, sitting straight up in the bed. She gasped, blinking at me almost sleepily, rubbing at her eyes. Julian? Her voice was raspy, tired and dry, but otherwise normal. I flicked on the bedside lamp, breathing hard. Babe, what's wrong? I shook my head. I couldn't look at her, couldn't breathe. I felt her wrap her arms around me, shushing me gently and stroking my hair. You were... Sure, it's okay. It's okay now, Jules, I'm okay. Just a bad dream. But it wasn't a dream. I knew it wasn't. After that, my girlfriend was different. She wasn't herself. I tried to go back to normal. She certainly tried to. She went to work like before, saw her friends, watched television with me on our couch. But it didn't feel like she was really there anymore. She didn't sleep much at all, and when she did, it was strange and restless. I more than once caught her sleeping with her eyes wide open, just like that first night. Once I asked her what her dreams had been like recently, and she hesitated before telling me. You know how when meat is fresh and the muscles are still alive, so they move and squirm even though the animal is dead? She smiled and ruffled my hair. That's what the backs of my eyelids look like. The worst part was how normal she pretended to be, how fine she told me she felt, how she kissed me like always, and how she tried to joke, but it never came out quite right. I reached my limit one night a month later when I got home after having a drink with some friends. The house was completely dark, completely silent, completely still. The second I opened the door, I felt it. The unexplainable terror. Like there was a man in the closet. It didn't feel right in there. Nothing felt like it was in the right place, even though I knew it must have been. Everything just felt wrong.
Chelsea.
I called out quietly, shrugging off my jacket, wet from the rain. Are you awake, honey? No answer. I went to go upstairs when I saw her. She was down our hallway. Her head was half poking out around the corner, only her eyes showing in the darkness, wide open, staring at me, but not seeing me. She started to scream, and it was even worse to not be able to see her mouth. She screamed in short bursts, like a panting dog, the blood-curdling sounds jolting out of her. Fight or flight kicked in. I turned around and walked right back out the door, closing it behind me. I walked until I was across the street before looking back at the house. She was in our bedroom window, the lights turned on, illuminating her silhouette. I watched her rear back and slam her head into the glass once, then again, something dark and liquid trickling down to the frame. The paramedics had to tie her down to keep her from thrashing or from hurting herself. I watched as they took her away, begging them to kill her. I tried to call OEM, but all I got was a message that the number had been disconnected. I drove back there while she was still in the hospital, but there was nothing left but an empty warehouse. When I picked her up, she was completely normal again, the only proof of the episode being the stitches on her forehead. It was that day, the day I picked her up, when I felt completely broken down and helpless, that I started to hear her voice. Honey. I looked over at my girlfriend, or what my girlfriend had become. She was staring out the window, smiling peacefully. What was that? She glanced at me, her smile widening. Nothing, Julian. I didn't say anything. I turned back to the road, convinced I was just losing my mind. I had to be. It would make sense. But then I heard it again. Julian, open your eyes, honey, it's okay. Jesus Christ, Kessler, would you take that thing off him? I think he's had enough. It's been weeks since then now. We're home. We're safe. Or at least that's what Chelsea says. I'm trying to believe her. I know it was in my head. I know it was just whatever that device did to me.
But it felt so real when it was happening.
I'm terrified one day I'll wake up again in that room, and I don't think if I did I would bounce back so quickly.